So I'm going to do the welcome and the so welcome to Bay High First Other for User Research Design. Glad you could all come. Tonight we're going to talk about something we call longitudinal light. So we were having a discussion, I don't know, a couple months ago about how anytime you mention doing some kind of longitudinal study around product people, they're always like, ugh. Because they think that you're going to disappear for 3 months or whatever and then come back with some data. And so we were talking about the fact that actually you can do longitudinal in a light kind of way. So that's how we got here tonight. I've got 3 great panelists here. Twyla Campbell, she's a senior user researcher. Oh, can we get the slides?
Kaari.
Yes.
Then you need to bring it.
Okay. There, like that. Okay.
So booming.
So, so yes, we're going to talk about what is longitudinal research, just to make sure we're all on the same page for the purposes of this discussion. When should you use the methodology? Why? And then our speakers will go through some case studies, and then we'll kind of review some shared success factors, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So let me introduce the speakers to you. We have Twyla Campbell. She's a senior user researcher here at Chegg. Kaari, I know I had Nadigapal?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. She's a UX researcher at Adecco at Google. And Katrina Noel, who is president of No Research. So I'll give you a quick bio on Twyla. So Twyla did research at Microsoft in Washington before moving to the Bay Area to work at Chegg. She is focused here on our Chegg study product and has been here over 2 years. She's a native of Canada and is a fan of the Vancouver Canucks and endures a lot of mostly friendly trash talk from the Sharks fans in her office. Kaari has worked for Stanford School of Education, Stanford Medicine, studying methods of optimizing academic and professional performance. She's now a researcher for Google, as I mentioned, where she uses ethnography, longitudinal methods, and lab studies to investigate user experience. She was born in the UK, and she is a CrossFit junkie. And Katrina is president of No Research. It's a consultancy specializing in conducting focus groups, ethnographies, in-depth interviews, intercepts, mobile, online. Basically, they do it all. Noah's been creating custom qualitative research designed for clients by combining methodologies from traditional in-person research with online and mobile approaches for over 14 years. She's also a co-founder of Scoot Insights. She is going to be cooking and hosting her first Thanksgiving this month, and she's nervous already. Okay, so let's kick it off by everybody getting on the same page about what is longitudinal. Katie, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Sure. So there's another quote up there from Jacob Nielsen that basically says that the first rule of usability, don't listen to your users. And the point is that when you do these kind of short-term studies and ask the users what they have done in the past and what they're going to do in the future, you really can't trust them. So Jacob Nielsen goes on to say you really need to be observing users as much as you can, and also, just not really taking them at their word for what they say they do or what they say they're going to do. And so it's kind of impossible to always follow users around, and sometimes it is possible to have longitudinal field studies, but those things are really expensive. So in lieu of that, we really need to think about ways to get into their context, and part of getting into the context is also getting into their time frame when it comes to a product. So that's why longitudinal becomes just so necessary. And so it's about understanding users over time. So the understanding users component of that comes from really getting into their context, getting that portion of ecological validity, as well as just this really holistic understanding of users that takes several pieces of evidence from several methods in order to just paint this overarching picture of what the user is really doing And also the over time aspect of it, so longitudinal obviously means over a long period of time, and that could differ from case to case and from need to need. So, of course, sometimes longitudinal can be quite short. In my experience, I work on hardware at Google. Sometimes longitudinal is actually over a day. So we're doing a comfort study or a preference study over a day, and we're just pinging users every hour or every couple of hours, and then we use longitudinal data analysis methods in order to understand how it's influenced over time. Of course, longitudinal can go on and can be days, weeks, months, even years. And so the question then you have to ask yourself is really, what is your time frame? What does your product look like? What is the learning curve of your product, and when is the optimal time to stop? And also, what is, as I said, your time frame? So how much time can you really afford to do this for? And in that case, you might actually have to make some compromises and do some things longitudinally, perhaps at a smaller scale, but also maybe construct some things in a more cross-sectional manner. So do you guys have anything to add to?
No, I think that's important to keep in mind, that longitudinal is not, if it's over X number of days, that then deems it a longitudinal project. It is much more about understanding the touch points, understanding the journey, life cycle of a product, whatever it is, that's your time frame. So it's really interesting about seeing throughout a day. I mean, I've done studies where it's, checking in once a month. So it's really about what you're trying to understand and what the time period is that you're covering within that. So I work with a lot of companies in retail spaces, in product spaces, service spaces. So those customer journeys and those customer experiences with the brand can differ largely across that. And so you really have to approach it when you're designing the research about what is that time period, what do we need to do in that real-time kind of way, because some things can be done in the moment, and often longitudinal can be complemented by something that is in situ in the moment, because users can respond sometimes while they're doing things as well as over a long period of time. So I think it's not more flexible than, okay, this is this methodology that always works like this.
Certainly another aspect. The product that I work on for these longitudinal studies I've been doing is 100% digital. There's no person contact whatsoever. And since our general population is students, there's a huge and a substantive difference in how they interact with our product at the beginning of the semester, since we're predominantly for learning, how they engage with homework versus midterms and finals. And they're getting a lot of feedback outside of our product in order that changes how they want to interact with us. So again, the time frame of the day versus 6 months, because we know that there are differences in what they use our product for and how it needs to change to serve them. So the time frame is relevant.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about, we touched on timing a little bit. Katrina, can you talk a little bit more about when we should use this methodology?
Yeah, I think we've said when you can, so there are some restrictions. There are some times where you would love to do a beautiful long study and time budget constraints are there. So, that's kind of one lens to look through it at. And then really where you are in the cycle and what you're hoping to learn at that point. So a lot of times when I speak to a client and know they're moving into a longitudinal kind of subject land is when they're trying to understand the use of something, the experience of something, the life cycle of either their experience with something or their experience with the product. And where you're not going to get the depth of insights that you need from the first experience with it, from exposing something to them in a moment, that's not the depth of understanding you need. You really need to see what it's like the next week or the next month and how it's changed their lives, what they're doing differently as a result. And so I think, there's a number of different cases where I've come in, like, how do we mock that up? Well, let's get people who bought this 2 weeks ago, and then let's talk to people about who are going to count it now and kind of cobble it together. But in this lovely, perfect world, it would be great to watch that whole journey unfold with the same, because then you're not having to allow for maybe people who bought it last week are a little bit different in some way that makes that experience not as fluid for you as a researcher. So And then I think it's really the questions that you want to study matter. When the focus is on that experience, then those questions along the way really matter. It matters what day 2 is like versus day 4. That's going to be something different about your product or service. That's going to mean they're renewing or buying again or love it after they wash it, right? I mean, if you're looking for that kind of information, the ability to do it over time is going to give that to you. We sort of talked about what it's not for, and to understand like moment of purchase, recall of an ad, something they're going to see right then and there, and you can be with them digitally or in person and be able to clock that reaction and have them talk to you about it. Maybe that's not something you need to do over time, but if you need to see the growth of something with the consumer, that's when we put this lens on typically.
Great. Anybody want to add anything to that before we move on?
Yeah, and I would definitely say, I mean, from a hardware perspective, there are certainly times when you just really shouldn't be doing a longitudinal study, or at least a very longitudinal study, especially when your prototype isn't quite there yet. We've had times when our prototype pretty much dies after 2 days, and so giving a user a prototype for a week would just not fly. And there have been times when something critical about the product just isn't working. For one of our products, for one of our devices, we had a stakeholder who was really excited in a longitudinal study and wanted us to give it to consumers over about a week, but notifications wasn't working for this device. And that's just, I mean, the device did more than notifications, and so we could have looked at it from that angle, but notifications was such a key and integral part of the experience that we just had to kind of call it and say, we can't do this right now. Maybe we can do some lab studies around it. Maybe we can kind of push it into the future, but not right now. And also, in terms of the question that you want to answer, there are just some questions that are better relegated to just a quick lab study or usability study. But when it comes to questions like, are you looking at perhaps factors around abandonment or factors around new workarounds that users adopt or pain points that accrue over time, then those are the kinds of questions that when you search your feelings, you need to do a longitudinal study for.
I just wanted to pop in on the prototype not being ready, because I think there's also long-term iterative studies, which may feel longitudinal because they go for a while, right? So the definition's a little fuzzy, right? Because you could say, okay, we're going to do the second prototype on the next day, or something. So I think this definition is a little bit fluid. So if longitudinal sounds scary, maybe just sort of look at like what is happening over time, because whatever happening over time, we'll probably tackle.
Yeah, what can you spin on your fields and turn around?
Yeah.
Not only that, but to jump in, another aspect is even if you're talking to the same participant, and over time it may not be about the same questions, it may be the same interaction, it may not be the same context, but you're going to have at different points. You could view that as a longitudinal, where it's like, hey, we have one of our personas, this person is an exemplar, they exactly fit our persona. Just talking with them over time and seeing how they're changing and adapting, what's happening with them. And that gives you a longitudinal point of view, same person over time, there's some contextual thread that is building all this data together so that you're getting a more complete and robust picture of whatever it is you're trying to learn.
Great. Okay, Twyla, let's stick with you. Why don't you talk about why
That
you would do
short version, one of the things that's really important is we're not here because we're nosy, we're not here because we're bored, we're trying to make something and we're trying to make it better. So that is always, and it's kind of something that's been assumed through this conversation. When we're talking about our prototypes, we're talking about what we're building and like, are they buying again, are they repeat customers? We're trying to impact something. This is not because we have nothing better to do with our time and we're just doing it for, not just, but we're doing it for academic research in order to expand our general knowledge of this topic. So what are we trying to do? How are we trying to impact our customers and our products or our services? That's one thing that's really important as to why you should do this. And another aspect that we've kind of alluded to is this user-product relationship. And it's kind of vague in that sense, but it's some way that working with this product or service or brand is, and the user is doing it over time, or in some way they're interacting with a parallel or concept or something that's going to change or develop in some way. Then the last piece is the temporality aspect, and I really want to say over time, but I think that implies that this is an ongoing development, that, you get to this one point, and then because I've gotten over this barrier to entry, and now I'm going to do this, and I'm going over the learning curve, and that's kind of over time development. But it could just be that in this moment of time, if you're working on a fitness tracker, for example, in the hardware, right now I'm doing my cardio, and that's going to be different than how I'm doing it when I choose to do my strength training. It's not that my cardio impacted my strength training, it's that these are two different things that happen in different points of time. And so overtime suggests that it's kind of this developing relationship, as opposed to, no, it's just now is different than then, which is different from this next now, and that's contextually relevant. So that's why I really think in terms of the why you should is because there is something interesting, something relevant in that relationship and the dynamic nature of the relationship between your user and your product or service that is changing or changes, and you need to capture that in order to improve your product. Whether it's, for example, again, washing the garment, it's the fact that you're getting sweaty and all of a sudden this doesn't fit right. It's the fact that right now I'm working on this and now I'm on my phone and I need to transition back and forth. And it's not because I was on my desktop and now I need to go to my phone. It's just that is a relationship that is not static. So, short version. Sentence.
Well, and I think, I spent a lot of time in being a research consultant, having a consultancy, our role is really connecting clients with their consumer, with that experience, right? To sort of get that relationship closer. And what better way to get that closer than to feel, see, hear, watch the journey through your product or service, right? So it's allowing them to not come back with a report after talking to people in a moment of time. It's letting the tools are out there to let them observe this process as it unfolds and to really connect better to the points along the experience, so that someone says, aha, they need to move from their desktop to their phone, right? Oh, like, think about that. How's that going to work if they're not on Wi-Fi? Whatever the situation is, they see it happen. It's this. It's not a memory. It's not, oh, the time I did X, or it's not sitting statically in a report. They're seeing the problems unfold. They're seeing the delight unfold, which is nice too. But yeah, it's a really good way to put them in the experience and closer to their customers.
I think an ongoing point of that you're alluding to as well is, I would slightly disagree with the wording that people don't know what they want. What they do is we have stories, and we have memories, and we change them to how we fit ourselves and what we think about them. So when we're reflecting back on our behavior, that perception is accurate. Don't negate that their perception of what they did, but it is colored. We all go through these, we tell stories about what we did because we're narrative people. And so when you're retrospective, like, oh, I went through this really thing, like, that retrospective is important in how they remember that experience, but it is going to be different than what they felt at the time, and capturing both points. And also then you get a chance to say, like, oh, I went through this learning curve. At the time, it was this. I was struggling with all of this when I got through, but it was really valuable on the other side. Or they remember it differently for whatever reason, and capturing those data points at that time allows you to understand the dynamic nature of how people reminisce and are going to talk about your brain experience.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would say as well, it just teaches you about things that you really wouldn't expect and you really didn't kind of map out when you were initially thinking about your user's journey. We had one device that had kind of two options for button configurations, and one of the options was pretty intuitive, pretty standard, and the other option included kind of access to some of the more exciting features of the device, and so we kind of tested out the more exciting option, the configuration. And what we found longitudinally was that initially people were really excited and they liked it a lot, but then over time they just kind of got more and more irritated with really how unintuitive it was and how many mistakes they made and how things were just unexpected. And so we just did not predict that kind of switch and change. I mean, it sounds like pretty obvious when I'm saying it, but we really didn't expect that, because we too thought the experience was pretty exciting and that they would just want to stick with it. And so yeah, kind of things you can.
Yeah, and I think, it allows not only the consumers to have that experience, but to have the research team have that experience. So if you're doing something over time, you have time to change what you're doing.
Yes.
It's not signed, sealed, delivered. You go out into field work and whoop, that's it. Like, we didn't think of that question, right? That came up during the day. You can probe on it, you can try to get it in there during the tight fieldwork schedule, but it's really kind of luxurious to have a project over time and, oh, we're learning this, so let's ask them to do this now.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we're interested in putting out a product that is good over time. You know, I mean, people, the first thing they think about when they are purchasing a product is they go on Amazon and they read the reviews, and in a lot of the reviewers talk about, you know, how the product behaves over time, and if the product, if they say, well, it was good for the first 3 days and then it was really annoying, people are not going to buy that. So, you know, in a sense, we really are thinking about the bottom line.
So let's go ahead and move on to case studies. I think that by going through the individual case studies, we'll probably share a lot more of the shared success factors and those sorts of things. So, Katie, do you want to start with and talk about the hardware-related case study?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, we did have one product that we were working on, and this was when we were pretty far into production. And at that time, we had a lot of questions that could be deemed longitudinal. So, what makes people kind of give up using the product? What are some of the workarounds that people use to enhance their capabilities with this product? So, what is the learnability of this product, as well as kind of everything in between kind of questions. So we had some really instant, short questions that we wanted to ask. We also had some kind of in-between, kind of short but longitudinal questions like, you know, are people comfortable with the product over a day or two? And so concurrently, we were kind of running all three types of projects that we had. You know, some lab studies going, we had the longer lab studies going, and then we had the longitudinal studies where we had people go away with the product and then evaluate it over time, and they would kind of send us a survey a day and then come back for interviews after a week. And we also had focus groups as well with the participants. And the focus groups were really cool with the participants because, and this is something we're going to talk about as well, kind of retention of participants. It kind of made them feel like they were in this community of testers and that their opinion was really valued, and also like they were harmonizing. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And in order to do this, I mean, it seems like a lot of work, and it was, but we had to be meticulously organized. You know, we had to kind of keep things separate. We had to support each other, and of course have stakeholder buy-in through all of this with, you know, pretty tight deadlines, and you know, we just keep giving our findings as they come. So once the lab study is done, here's the finding from the lab study. You know, once we've got enough surveys in from the participants, here's a little deck about that survey and what that survey had to tell us. And so it was kind of all through it pretty valued, and I feel like we got like a good sort of 3D image of what the product was with all of these kind of various angles and investigations.
So, in that particular situation, how many users are we talking about?
It differed from study to study. So the instantaneous studies was more like, you know, 10. But with the more longitudinal studies, we had them use the device over like a week to two, and we would cycle them out. And in that case, it would be kind of like 15 to 20.
Thanks. Well, Katrina, let's hear from you.
So I'm lucky enough to work with a retail fashion brand that take the customer very, very close and to their heart, and really love hearing about that from them over time. And so we've been doing a series of longitudinal studies every year around the holidays, kind of from building your wish list to what you return in January. And it was really interesting. We were building this great community, and then they came and said, I'm not sure we can do a long-term study about this, but we're relaunching our sportswear brand, and we can't mess up again. Was basically the objective. And so we recruited these women. I think we started with about 60, and it was over a little bit of a time period where we had to do some refreshing, and we ended up with a lower number than that overall because we're going to speak about participant engagement and things like that, and when you're giving your time, love, and energy to a study, that does ebb and flow. So I always like to start with a little bit bigger than I need at the end, just to kind of compensate for that. So we recruited across a national sample with a whole bunch of different exercise habits, all the way from I just want to look nice when I meet my girlfriends to lunch, to I'm training for a marathon and need something to really support me. So we did, it was all based on an online platform. Initially, it was all about habits, needs, preferences, shared drawer, all of that kind of work, which could have been its own full study, right? I mean, it's robust enough, that's a piece of work. But what we ended up doing was, when we sent them samples from the new line, we were able to send them things that, from what we discovered in that first portion of the research. So there was this incredible surprise and delight when they opened the box, and things were not in like the gray tester color, right? They were in, we saw that you love neon, so here you go. So that was really fun, and we kind of watched their whole experience. This was from the What Happens When You Wash It, which was a fun part of that project. And so we kind of got through the wearing of these products, and then there was a gap. This was not a solid talk to these people every week. Then the products came out in stores, and so they were asked to go shop in the store. And that's when we had an in-person component where we actually met some of the people in the store at the end of this process. They felt like they were part of this community. It was this kind of like love fest, hugs in the store at the end of the day. Because of that, taking them through time and not just making them work for you for months, right? That's not what anyone's going to get out of this. It's being heard for months. That was just so exciting that they got to see visuals in the store display, and they were on camera pointing and going, I told you to use that word. Like, that's very exciting. And so I think, you know, there is so much work. There's so much meticulous planning to make that work. And there's also a continual filter of what you're telling these people, what they're committing to, what you're promising them, how you deliver that. This is a relationship that you're having with a group of people over time. And so, you know, really kind of making sure all your ducks in a row and what you've lined out. And then you can have some surprise and delight factors along the way. You just don't want to have some surprise and disappoint when they're overworking for you, or their time shifts, and suddenly they're on vacation, so they're not getting the incentive because your timeline shifts. So, you know, when we talked about longitudinal light and can you do it, yes, you can. You have to be very well organized and very good communicators, because people are people, and you're in a big part of their life at that point.
So in that particular example, how did you do your weekly check-ins? Was it via Skype or?
So that was all asynchronous. So we didn't do any live interviewing throughout the first part of the program. It was much more like a mobile or digital diary for the first component. So there were lots of take pictures of this in your closet, lay this stuff out on your bed and take pictures. So our moderators, we would, you know, read those responses and probe them accordingly. But there really wasn't a face-to-face component until that last in-store shopping experience. But reporting out to the team is pretty key too, right? Those deliverables along the way. I always make sure to put that in the project timeline as well. Like, yes, it's nice we're learning these things in this order, but what are you getting? Are you getting to observe this? Do you get a report at these points? How do you check in? And not necessarily in that example, but often cherry picking is a sort of, I don't know, neat way to put it, but selecting participants to do future phases is something that you discuss with the team. So they also need to know when those points come in. When do you choose to send a prototype to these users? So I think, yeah, it is an organization communication game on all fronts.
Definitely. Twyla, why don't you go ahead and share your case study?
So, mine was structured a little differently. There were a lot of, it was supposed to be, and then became. Which is always fun. It's part of Longitudinal, but that's where, to your point earlier, you can adapt. And it started off with, we've done a lot of one-off research on our users, again, college students, so we know about how they engage in this moment, what they look like at this point of time, what they do at this point of time, and we had a lot of analytical data, and the question was, like, well, how do we marry this? Like, right now, we don't know why. We know that they're behaving differently around tests, but we don't know why. We don't know how they shift from this point to this point. And so that's why really getting a longitudinal study was following these same individuals through these multiple phases of their semester. And so I had a lot of buy-in from my team, and the way it's structured here, not only was I going to do this longitudinal study, I'm also the dedicated researcher, so I had to do my regular user experience, regular usability testing, looking at visuals. So how do I run in parallel, which is the idea of the light. And to do that, I offloaded a lot of work onto my team. And so in terms of making sure that there was ongoing communication, we had regular syncs. So the methodology was originally a diary study that became too burdensome for our users as well as for our team to look at that data. And we did a weekly check-in again, kind of like that digital diary study. They'd come in and give us info. And then we did weekly syncs with an analysis of the data with the design team, PM, and business, and analytics, and QA. Like, we had the team come in and go through the raw data, which was really exciting because it's also raw data and like, let's manage this. But it made sure that they got the weekly check-ins, it was relevant data, and then we could pull in from there. And it also kept my team, we talk about engagement of the users, it kept the team really engaged because they were able to interact. We were having an aspect of the team, what are we working on right now? How do we make sure we're getting relevant? Let's pose these questions that we have to our users in this moment. And so it would change weekly, which added to the legwork, but the team could see that they was getting deep value out of what we were hearing back from our students, and kept them coming back next week so that they could find out what the answer to their question was, so they could use that to impact their designs or to impact the product. And it was, again, this was a full 5 months. So weekly check-ins for everybody, which was a lot of burdens, and so engagement of keeping to the theme of college students, they got a midterm care package. How do we make sure we do that? We sent them a bunch of candy and snacks and all themed to, you will laugh, but then we got heartfelt responses back. And we were able to get like, this is why it matters, this is why it's really important, you get me. And that was something that, again, increased the engagement. They were friends now, we knew them by name. We could say, like, when we went to later and had specific designs we wanted to test, we wanted to get feedback. We know that they had use cases that we thought we were solving for. They should like this. This is perfect for this particular user. Let's go and make sure that they actually want to use it and engage with it the way we intended. Because if they don't like it, we're on the wrong track. And we need to keep rethinking it. So that's what allowed us to get immediate results throughout while still getting this broad picture and towards the end of having a really rich understanding of our students. And kind of one of the surprises that we learned out of this, surprise, heavy reminder is how dynamic people are and how dynamic their lives are. And it was, I can't help anymore, I dropped that class, sorry. It's like, oh, okay, how do we engage this way? Like, well, that's fine, we can refresh and we can change our approach. But like, that's just a thing that they did. And we have to react to that. And, oh, that might explain some of our general user behaviors because that is a common behavior. And that was fun.
Yeah, just so I got to witness that particular study firsthand, and talking about how we kept the students engaged and rewarded them. It was interesting because Twyla also had a gold star system, so every time people on the team came to the weekly debrief analysis session, they would get a gold star, and it's amazing what people will do just for a gold star. that you laughed. Again, themed appropriately. Gold star with their name. You could see, as soon as people were walking in, like, I get my star, right? The other point to remember is as soon as you're tracking something, people assume you're going to do something with this. Like, what gets tracked is important. So I'm like, oh, they're expecting a reward. I need to make sure that I can, like, oh, you did the most, you do this, and so I had to figure out a reward structure based on this. But it's like, oh, you're tracking this matters. I'm like, yes, it does. You will get a thing, I promise. And making sure, but it lighthearted way, but again, showing that I notice and I care, and this is why it's important. So you get the fun and then the factual why this is relevant to improving the product. I think another side benefit with that project was that another thing that came out of it was this shared sense of empathy for the students, that a really deep sense of empathy that we didn't have across the entire team before. So, and that's something that I think it laid a really great foundation to build on.
Yeah, and to your point as well, they got to see these struggles firsthand. It wasn't a report. They could see it in their own words, and then the we're getting the emotion of it because the students were really comfortable in opening up in what their discussion was because they were being heard and we were reacting, which made them more interested in engaging with us and giving us better and higher quality feedback and more relevant. So it seems like it's all fluffy and adorable with like gold stars, but it's like, no, we got really rich, thick data that we're able to enact and make it better in products for our students in really fast turnaround and be able to validate that these were the right ideas and kind of prioritize what we were working on. So it's plus practical. It's not just because I'm using and like giving people stickers.
Right, and even though we're doing it over a long period of time, I think all of you have kind of touched on the fact that you can still, if you're making changes, you can even make them weekly in your product and your approach, but you're sticking with the same group of users over a period of time. So, anything you want to add to your case studies based on what we've just talked about? I know one thing that I thought about is just in general, there's a huge project management component with some research project like this. How about if everybody sort of talks a little bit about what you've experienced from that?
Yeah, I think it really is worth your while to kind of invest in sort of pre-planning and not only with your team but also with stakeholders. And as Katrina said, having sort of this timeline which includes the deliverables and just being that kind of meticulously organized to the point of mapping it out in time as well as kind of detailing, okay, what data are you expecting at what time points, and that just kind of makes things flow a lot easier and seem a lot less nebulous. And also, of course, I can't overstate the importance of piloting. So, we would always do a pilot that's almost what the real study should look like, if not kind of something that we can actually fold in to the real data, because for all your planning, there's some things that you just can't expect and that you can't predict, and you don't want that to kind of ruin your study or put a fly in the ointment at the very least as you're already on the roll.
I think along those lines, there's the adaptability to be able to adjust mid-plan if it's not working. And one thing that I know that we discussed before, but we haven't mentioned yet, is sometimes going, this isn't working, it's not worth the investment, we need to stop.
Yep.
And being comfortable and able to do so rather than spending your resources on something that's not getting the value that you need out of it or for whatever reason isn't working. So that flexibility doesn't just mean adapting to make it work at all costs. Sometimes it's not worth the effort or the cost to drop it.
Because just as participants can be unpredictable, companies can be unpredictable, and over time, some decision could be made, someone else comes in to the mix, and maybe this study isn't the priority anymore. And so, it's knowing when to shut it down. It's also knowing, can we do something with this now, right? Is that we've got this set up, we put this work and energy into it. Is there something else we can use this for? So that's often the creative problem-solving episode. But I think in terms of the actual tactics and the project management of it, I tend to divide it up, whether these are 3 people specifically or 3 roles that overlap a little bit, is I really like to keep the management of the participants separate from the engagement, which sounds like the same thing. But one is, why haven't you answered your questions? Where are you? I've called you 7 times, and you're not getting your gold star, right? That's one kind of persona, shall we say, that you develop. And the other one is, hi, oh my God, that's so exciting. Please tell me more about X. And I've really found that whether that's the same person or not, having different names attached to those people helps considerably. So I do have kind of a good cop, bad cop, or a moderator, manager kind of split with the approach. And then there should be somebody who's listening with a higher level lens on it to try to think about those reports that are going out to the team. What are we hearing? Because these are in-depth, you're getting to know these people so well. You also need to sort of stay researcher at the same time and say, what are we learning over time? I'm having this emotional connection with this person because I know their daughter is visiting next week and they're super excited about that because they've been talking about it for weeks, right? But at the same time, where's the business decision that that's coming from? What is it impacting the findings themselves? So I think of those 3 hats, and depending on, who's in your team and who can play those roles most effectively. But I do see that that's kind of the divide and conquer approach to get it done well, and to keep focused on the business decisions that are being made.
I absolutely concur.
Okay, so let's go ahead to our last slide here with success factors. We've covered some of this already, as far as really agreeing on the goals up front, and Katie, you mentioned the planning and piloting, collaborating with the broader team, the deliverables, knowing when to stop. Let's talk a little bit more about motivating participants. And so how do you lay out, do you incentivize or pay participants along the way?
I typically do. And a lot of clients come to me and say, well, I don't really understand what the difference is between this and our online community, right? We have a community and we send surveys out every once in a while. People get points, right? So there is that component of research being done. And because I work in the qualitative world, I do try to say, this is actually a higher level of engagement, and we have to thank people more and more often and have it make sense. So I do kind of, we always structure it out how much, if someone's perfect, if they get all the gold stars, they're 100%, what does that mean? And that's what goes in the budget. But they earn that along the way, and we have to kind of decide how that's broken out. And I think it depends on the product and or the idea that you're talking about as well. Sometimes you need it's less exciting. You need like a juicier prize at the beginning, because someone doesn't want to talk about I don't know, dish soap or something. It's not like, ooh, I get to be in this project, right? So you have to do kind of a bigger upsell and then make it such a good experience that it kind of goes down from there. At other times, they're super excited to be involved with this brand that they love, and you don't have to make the carrot quite as big at the beginning, and you can kind of make that, but if you stick with this through the end, there's a payoff. So I think it's kind of knowing your audience, knowing what's going to be intriguing for them. In a lot of work that I do, gift cards and goodie bags go a lot farther than giving them more money, because they've started to feel like an insider, they start to feel like they're working with you. So those kinds of perks, which end up being a lower cost for the client budget because it's coming from them, end up being actually much more impactful in terms of the engagement.
Katie, do you want to add to that?
Well, specifically for incentives, I have had sort of a bonus system where, and I think you were also alluding to this, where basically if people, for example, had completed all of the diary tasks and all of the survey tasks, then they would get a special bonus at the end, which is either more money or a big fed or something like that. But I wanted to say a couple of words about recruitment, and you brought that up in a few minutes ago in terms of making sure to over-recruit, but also if you have the luxury of a larger participant pool, you kind of know, which participants are likely to kind of flake on you, and those that are going to stick around. And so you don't want to sort of manipulate so hard that you have the risk of participant bias, but at the same time, you do want to try to call those kinds of participants that are not answering your calls, even from the jump, and things like that.
Yeah. Both mirroring the experiences that I've had with this as well, where it depends on how exciting the project is, how bought in are they excited about the brand and they want to continue, making sure that the non-monetary and non-remuneration is relevant and important. Again, those care packages were timed for that reason. It was the midpoint slump. They had other things to worry about, and making sure they're appropriate. And plus those multiple hats of that surprise and delight came from the, oh my gosh, it's so good to talk to you again version, as opposed to the, hey, you haven't answered, and kept those separate so that there was kind of this payment person who you weren't necessarily in like the task list or you weren't that excited about, and then there's the fun one who cares deeply, and they're the one that gave you the thing. And so even if they were off track with one, you were still on track and loving with the brand and the person who's better representing the brand, and that was allowing them to continue an ongoing engagement. And part of for retention, another aspect is know how much wiggle room you have. We were able to allow students, like, you're on holiday, something's happened, a medical issue in some cases, you drop that class, we'll still work with you, we're still engaged. Knowing how much you can allow them to vary and slack. And I was getting apologies regularly. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, this is a day late. I'm like, you have a week to do this. You're doing this faster than you do your homework, and I know that because you're telling me how you're doing this instead of your homework. Okay, but that's getting them that high engagement. Although, admittedly, that takes a lot more effort to create that person. If you have a more disengaged and they're not talking to Twyla, oh, hi, it's so great to see you, have a great holiday conversation. They're talking to somebody else, they're going to need to be compensated in a different way because they don't have a relationship. And so we spent the time doing the relationship rather than the cost. And you can vary those as well depending on what resources you have and how you want to do it. But there's a lot of levers and a lot of dials you can change, whether it's time you're investing, whether it's brand, and what are your needs of your study. Do you need to have them highly engaged? In my case, we wanted them highly engaged with the brand in the first place, so it was okay to have that aspect of they're engaged. If we were lower engagement trying to get them in, we wouldn't want them to be so supportive of the brand because that would skew the results and be non-representative anymore. So we had that variable that we decided ahead of time to allow for it.
And I think these are studies that are much less likely to be blind, right? Because the nature of the study. So all of a sudden then you're working with brand impression, not just during the length of your study, but these are people who are going to talk about their experience with this long-term study, and having like a interview where they didn't give you a sandwich and you're feeling upset about it is like talked about this much, but something you spend a month on and your check got there 2 months later, that's a very different brand impact. So I think a lot of it is done with that in mind as well, that these people are really having an experience with the company, with the brand, and they're not going to put a line and say, well, that was the research team, I had a different experience with the brand. That's all in one mind. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
Great point in terms of planning ahead. When you get feedback that is outside of your scope, how are you going to channel it? I don't know, you're nodding, you're both giving that look. That is something where having that planned ahead of time and making the mistake to not do that again is always a good one. But when you're getting feedback or customer support and you're getting that kind of question through this media, right, you have to have the channels done ahead of time so that you can filter it to the right person.
God forbid it's medical and you're hearing about adverse effects for several months. So that's fun too.
You're their point of contact. They have a direct into the company and they don't understand or quite well, they probably care about your org structure, who they're supposed to talk to. You have to filter it on and make sure that it's getting to the right person and keep that separate. It's like, oh no, empathy, transfer it this way, and then get it resolved in a different manner. And then hopefully teach them not to keep doing this and using you as an insight source for whatever issue they're having. So that allowing for that they're going to come to you as their point of contact.
Also, if the research software has an issue, you also become the tech support for that if you're not careful. So there's lots of things where you're allocating, not blame, but a point person for.
Right, I want to be mindful of the time, so let's go ahead and move on to Q&A. Do you want to step up to the microphone over there so we can? We're videotaping this so that we've had some requests for video.
So yes, I'm in the middle of a diary study right now, a 3-month longitudinal diary study that also includes shop longs and in-person interviews, and it's blind. So these people have absolutely no idea who's sponsoring this research, and I'm paying them. And they're super engaged, we're having a fabulous time, it's great. But I'm really intrigued by this idea of goodie bags, or like gift bags, as a way of increasing engagement. And obviously, if you're Chegg, I get how you do that. If you're Google, I get how you do that. Whatever your clothing retailer, obviously people knew what brand that was, I get how you do that. What about when it's a blind study? Like, do you have ideas of what, I know it depends on the category, but have you had experiences of coming up with a creative goodie bag?
They got no Chegg stuff. They got Chegg swag and then food. It wasn't actually a lot of Chegg stuff. They didn't get discounts. We have general swag, and then it was themed food. Again, it sounds ridiculous, but it was midterms. They got anything that had smart in the name. They got a care pack for that. Smarties, smart water, smart food, smart bars. And it was just like, we know that you're going through, we know that you're going through a hard time, and we know you're going to get this truck. You're awesome. Keep being great. There you go. And so it doesn't have to be, and it was none of our, we had some swag because we have lots of swag. So it was that, but the food, and that was the theme. And so they're like, this is so adorable kind of tone. And even if they didn't like it, like, whatever. It was also really inexpensive. And food that traveled. So it doesn't just, what is the project, and then what is something around it And it doesn't have to be things like it's, I don't know, I'm just thinking of something that seems like it could be boring, but like socks, like here's a bunch of brands of socks. We know that we know something about you, here's something that's appropriate. Depending on the scale, like you can either do it themed to the individual, like hey, we know you have this, here's a bunch of things that are vaguely related to you and to this, or everyone gets the same thing because we're working on this kind of project.
Anybody else want to add to that?
It's trickier when you can't talk about the brand, because it's very easy to send fun brand stuff, right? As long as you can get your hands on it, and it often takes time as well. I've sent flowers. We were doing a very touchy medical project. It's about long-term pain management and things like that, and I didn't want anything to be fluffy. I didn't want to like give silly stuff. So then we spent a long time figuring out which flowers weren't depressing. So that was about a week of trying to figure out, but this is not what you get in the hospital. This is just something bright to brighten your spring, because it was during the spring. And so, and that, like, we got thank you notes for that. And it cost so much less than the dollar incentive that you would have had to send to say, it's the midway point, thanks, have some more money. But they were just like, oh my God, and you came, and they're so gorgeous, and we got pictures sent back. So just sort of anything that you would want to receive, right? I kind of think of it that way, because as soon as you get into food, I always worry about like allergies, am I going to try nuts, like what am I going to do?
They were all for you because I'm aware of allergies.
Okay.
And there were options in terms of variation, whether it's
Smart
gluten-free,
knowledge
vegan as
products,
well, yeah. It was very well, and then all separated so that you didn't have to interact with stuff you didn't want to eat. Yeah. Again, lots of planning goes into this kind of thing to find it and make it work, but non-edibles are also a good idea.
Do you have other questions? Anything our speakers want to add before we wrap up? Or we have another question.
I have a
Great.
question about confidentiality in terms of longitudinal studies. So, for example, sometimes I get in a situation where a bunch of engineers are, oh, there's this new intellectual property, and you're going to just release it outside the lab. They're comfortable having it in a lab study. Then as soon as it's outside, you have much less control of what happens to it, who else sees it, even if they sign an NDA. So just curious experiences dealing with those.
Yeah, so for us, we kind of have like several layers of kind of things. So obviously people are kind of NDA'd up to the teeth, but also we kind of first work with internals, and then we move to what are called friends and family. And then from friends and family, it goes to trusted testers who have been vetted to test and like used to this sort of thing. But I mean, it's always a concern, you know, that someone's gonna take your device and give it to whoever. But at that point in time, you know, with the protections in place and everything, and we kind of try to make it so it's like on the cusp of releases as well. By the time it gets to the trusted tester phase, so it would take whoever a pretty long time to copy it and release it.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll just do a plug for, you know, talking to people in person, which is still being done. And that's actually the best way to reassure that nothing is going to be without you knowing it. Because, you know, I get into situations with clients and I say, look, if someone takes a screen grab of anything during this project, is that going to be upsetting or a loss, or what happens at that point? Because I cannot prevent that. I can make them sign everything known to man. I can use secure platforms, but a screenshot is a screenshot, right? And so, you know, that's why we end up doing, you know, some in-person component of a lot of longitudinal projects, because, you know, take it to their house, take it to their office, watch the music, put it on your camera, you know? And so I think that, you know, we shouldn't just be thinking about this as digital only. This is really, you can combine approaches, and if something is really sensitive, then you remain in charge of that material and that product if it's necessary.
I think that's certainly an aspect of mixing it, so that it's, you can do something where it's ongoing and engaged. If the question is the project that you're looking at has components of intellectual property that you want to secure, I think kind of the phased approach allows for it. But again, it's kind of what's the worst case scenario, how do we deal with that, and how do we phase it so that we can either phase our audience and who our participants are, do we phase our research, and so that we allow them access up to a point, and then when they hit this point, then we've got the secure information, and then we have more control, and kind of thinking creatively of how do we make these barriers and then overcome them. And maybe it's just you break your own product until this point, and then when they hit that, then they can interact with it. Is another option.
Anybody else?
Getting up twice, too.
There's one in every group. I want to see now, I got flustered and forgot my question. Oh, I know what it was. So I've been doing longitudinal studies for a long time. I'm a huge believer. I just had a client want to do a whole customer journey map based on asking people, well, 3 months ago when you first joined us, what were you thinking? I was like, no, guys, come on. We're capable of more, better research than this. But I was up till 11 o'clock last night trying to get the people in the diary to answer questions, train my participants. It's a new batch coming in because we supplemented, we added some new people for this phase, and it takes a lot of time. And this whole hour that you've been presenting, I've been thinking, where's the light part of this longitudinal? Because it sounds to me like longitudinal research. And if this is light, what's normal? Because this to me is not light. I find it takes a tremendous amount of time for the researcher, and there's so many pieces that you can't anticipate. I don't know how you manage other studies at the same time.
Like I said, offloaded.
I'm an independent researcher. I bring in partners sometimes, but I find when I'm doing a big diary study, I kind of can't handle other work at the same time. So when you call this light, what were you thinking that made this light?
Well, I think for me, the diary study versus longitudinal is two different things in my mind. So if I'm doing a diary study, I'm getting a lot of content every day. I think it's about mapping out what the long-term study looks like and knowing when the busy periods are. Are you asking something every week? If so, when during that week are you allocating the time to think about it, right? To do the analysis and think about it. And do you have some support, perhaps, to do the daily, you didn't answer question 6, which we all love so much, it takes up so much time, right? Tell me more about that sandwich. We all love those moments. But so I think it's really about saying this is going to be over time. You may have done a diary study before. You may have talked to people for a week or 2 weeks, and it was intense, right? It was intense. You got a lot of data. So we're doing something different here. We're not having that intensity for a long time necessarily. If you have the resources, fantastic. But participants are going to peter out too. And client teams, that's a lot of information to digest. So if you're spacing it out to understand the journey, what are the key points? And those are kind of those intense times. And if it's structured like that, I know that's what I'm doing that day, and I'm not, surprised by the data influx at those times. And I think also kind of mixing up the methodology, whether, you do an online diary for a week, a month later they get the product to test, and a month after that you do interviews. That's sort of like 3 projects if you think of time and energy.
Another along the aspect where I said being able to do both, we stopped doing diary study for that reason because it was too intense. We couldn't keep up that kind of. So we had instead weekly surveys, and when they ticked this particular box and said, I did this, then we followed up. It's like, okay, right here I could see this, and now I need to go in depth on that. So it was reactive in that sense. So we didn't get as rich of data the entire time, but at the points that we had determined were most relevant, we were able to deep dive. And because my team was aware of this, they knew like, okay, I'm going to be pulled off, and I have to work on this it's going to require more time, but I'll be back at this point. And then kind of map it so that my other projects could ebb and flow around these expected points. It is a lot, and also an aspect of it is scaling down. Like that's where, what do you actually need to know? What do we need to have that rich of the data? Can it be a longer time period? Can it be fewer people? Can it be more people but less interaction? Let's just send out to like twice as many people. We're going to send a survey. There's not going to be that much curation. We're going to get less rich data. We're going to have more drop off, but that's our acceptable choice so that doesn't have to be as heavily managed. You just need the one person saying like you didn't fill out your survey this week, and then we'll look at it without having to ask for any follow-ups, and we're okay with that. And so it's tweaking those dials of how much data do you need versus this, and then you present it as this is the choice. I can't do this and this. I'm recommending this because I think this will give us the most data that we need at this point in time, and this will give us the baseline that we can scale up and down. And that's where the light aspect comes in. You get, and in some cases, less data, less rigor. You're scaling down on quality, you're scaling up on this other aspect, like how do you want to adjust it to make sure that you have a reasonable amount of time, which is where the mapping comes in, and really doing the pilot and figuring that out so you have a sense of where you're going to go and setting expectations with your teams. Like, that came up a lot with my team. We were not going to interfere and provide any leading questions until after midterms, and then it was, no, we're not, midterms haven't happened yet, As soon as midterms happen, now we're going to scale up. And that set expectations so that they knew that we weren't going to get the depth that they were going to ask for. And so when they did, we'd like, no, we had this conversation, we can't do that until now.
I think the other thing is if things are not that predictive, right? If there is not a project with a midterm in it, which is extremely helpful. If it's more about you can't tell when they're going to go shopping, when they're going to go to the doctor's office, like that's going to happen at a point in time. The whole reason you're doing a longitudinal approach is to see when it happens and what. So that is a little bit more intensive because you are paying attention to the project every day. So it's nice when you can kind of predict the ebb and flow and build your other projects in this lovely jigsaw puzzle. But I think, you know, the light is that you're not posing a research question necessarily every day, but it's almost a light touch just to make sure you know what's going on with your people. Because they're going to have moments during the study, and the whole point of listening to them over that period of time is to listen for when and where those happen.
Yeah, and you kind of have to be honest with yourself. I mean, Twyla had mentioned, you know, you have to kind of know when to stop and say, okay, like we're not getting anything out of this. But also, you know, am I actually seeing some data saturation here? So am I actually not getting any additional insights? If so, do I really need to ping them every day? Can I ping them every week? Do I really need to ping them every week? Can I ping them every 2 weeks? Do I really need a one-on-one interview? Can I do a focus group instead? Or, you know, can I just call them? Can I do a Skype session? You know, so just really trying to ask yourself the tough questions around, you know, unfortunately, what is the minimal I can do in order to make this flow? So,
Great, anything else?
Can you talk a little bit about incentives and like promising incentives if you're then going to be changing the study? Like when the study changes, have you promised people things and how do you manage that?
So, incentives, managing incentives.
As the study
As the study changes.
I feel like if you set expectations and they don't meet it, you get to choose how to react to that. You either say, and don't give them the whole incentive, right? Or you say, we're nice, we want them to like the brand, we give it to them anyway, right? But if you change the parameters, it's much more complicated.
Right.
And I tend to say, this is what was promised, even if we change, we're going to pay them what they said they were going to. It's not their fault. It's not their fault that we're on data overload right now, you know?
yeah. Or conversely, I mean, if the parameters change such that you're expecting more out of them, and kind of negotiating and saying, look, you know, it would be great, you know, things are going great, and it would be great if you could just do a little bit more. You know, how do you feel?
Bonus round.
Yeah.
We've decided to add on another point. There's a second phase. Framing it in that kind of sense allows for that renegotiation. And there's also a thing that I've done in other studies, and this one is, this is the baseline, and then there might be an opportunity, again, caging at the beginning, there might be an opportunity for more variability, and we'll discuss it when it comes up. So you've set expectations that this could change, and so when you have the conversation again later, it's not a surprise, like, oh, I can't deal with this. You've already framed it as this could change in the conversation about what this study is going to take and require of them.
And that their first payment or two is very accurate and very on time, right? You can afford to do some wiggle room if they know that you're a reputable, accountable company.
Anything else?
I'm curious, a lot of the stuff that you all have been talking about and you can see, I'm wondering if any of you have had experience in running longitudinal studies. For B2B, where you have to take into consideration confidentiality, also working with a company, things like that.
Longitudinal and B2B.
I can't speak to that.
So, I just saying this to my colleague the other day, I do a lot of work. Okay, so I think in the B2B world, I tend to notice that the projects are shorter. Like their longitudinal is a shorter commitment because all of a sudden you're asking somebody that you have a different kind of relationship with to engage like that. I've done some work about kind of like point of sale or kind of things like that where you're talking about a relationship between companies and you need them to have an experience with either a way of doing something, software product, something like that. I find that those are more touch points over time than a continual project. So there's going to be 3 times we're going to touch, up in with you, right? We're going to deliver this thing, get your first impressions, we're going to see how it was the first week, and we're going to see how it is in the second week. So it's kind of longitudinal, but you're really saying, at these moments in time, we need you to commit rather than, welcome to this community, and we're all going to talk about it for a really long time. So I think in that sense, it's more sporadic, I've found.
Anything else? Yes.
How many team members in each of these projects are working internally? I know there's a lot of planning that goes to that, but how many researchers or people are working on this project?
We'll talk about the number of people working on these projects.
So Dr. Peterson and work away.
Oh, thank you.
Let's start with Trina.
I was going to go for it varies. But I was going to be at the end of the line. I was like, yeah, ladies, it varies. Anyway, it does. I think I think this is the kind of project. So I'm coming in as a research agency and need to have the client team engaged. So my client team is that company. I always make sure that there's a team member or 2 on their end that is actively involved in this process. Someone's reading the data, someone's observing. So they're kind of auxiliary team members, and depending on how engaged that person is, I need less staffing on my end. So I have a lot of brand managers, project managers, all of that kind of who are in charge of this insights work, and they're really as involved as I am. So that's great because that's kind of less commitment on our end. I would say at least 2, preferably 3. So at least there would be someone managing the logistics and making sure all of that is in line, and there's someone dealing with the content. And depending on the length of time of the project, those people's schedules can kind of ebb and flow as well. So that's really rough, and that's dealing with kind of small scale qualitative communities. If you're dealing with more complex systems that may need more, but brains, I think that's usually how many I have involved.
Yeah, it really differs for us as well. Usually it's kind of a few people orbiting around one person. So, it's kind of one main person doing most of the stuff, and then perhaps one person recruiting, perhaps one person helping with data collection / analysis, perhaps one person overseeing and kind of reporting the stuff out. And so, but a lot of times it is just kind of the one nucleus person. I would say when it comes to kind of ideal, and maybe we can talk about ideally what would be a blue skies scenario. Well, I mean, blue skies, I think it's a whole bunch of people. But no, I mean, ideally, what is the minimum that you'd really like to have? I think it's great to have at least 2 people to do analysis. So you're not just kind of baking in there with the analysis and going insane, and coming up with stuff that doesn't really make sense. And also, and also, it's also great to have, as you said, a recruiter, someone who is another point of contact with the participants. So I would say that would be like the core nucleus of a team.
I think that's fairly similar to my experience as well. There's usually like a lead researcher designing the study and going there. One thing that I've found is that these auxiliary people or the team varies in those individuals. So maybe 2 to 3 people, but the other 1 or 2 persons will change. So you have a recruiter, and then once they're recruited, they're no longer as necessary, and then that hands off to the person managing the compensation and managing kind of communications and keeping them on task, which may not be your recruiter, but that's still another person. And then when that ends, then you might have somebody going into doing more of the analysis or helping with kind of curating the data and cleaning that up and allowing for more rigorous analysis. So again, the details of the role can vary, the person filling those roles can vary, but having one point person kind of arranging it all, keeping it on track and on point, another person managing the participants and the communications that way, and gathering all the data, reacting to them when they have the experience that you're looking to dive into. So, again, kind of in a realistic point of view, like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm worried that this doesn't sound light either, now that we're saying this, right? Like the number of people, there's 14 people and everybody's managing participants. But I think if you do divide that out, right, if you have these roles and they're all kind of orbiting the main person, that does mean that that's not their full day.
Right, sure.
Right? So, I mean, I think that we're not talking about like 3 full-time people for 6 months length of this project.
I think it's just individual people's. So, for example, the light aspect to mine, and again, I realized I was kind of an ideal situation because it turns. Great time and points and over that is, it was a lot of the team, but it was literally an hour a week for most of my team. That is all they had to do and all they had to commit to. 1 hour in scope, that was it. And so that was a really small, like that's one, gosh, how many times spent in meetings that may not be relevant. Like that is an easy ask. And that was the light aspect. And so by having, 7 people in a room, all of a sudden, that adds up to a lot of time and mental effort to get this work done. And then it was done and we could move on to our next tasks. So by the distribution, again, I joked, like I also outsourced it, but I did, so that it could get done quickly and efficiently, and then we could all go back to the next thing. And that allowed that dispersion to get it done more efficiently with less overall effort. Still the same amount of time, but just done in more condensed with multiple people.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point is that, it's light not just in terms of the data collection and management, but also in terms of the data analysis. I mean, you're just going to have a mountain of data, and sometimes you're just so overwhelmed that a lot of it gets overlooked, and it's just, in the graveyard somewhere. And so, doing something creative like what Twyla mentioned in terms of getting all your stakeholders to get their hands in it. You get all the perspectives, in this concentrated effort, and you have people there who are giving their support, and it's really good for the team as well as actually getting the points and the data analyzed. So things like that. Really
If your follow-up questions, if everyone's able to dig in the thing that they're most interested in, and then shares it amongst themselves, plus being able to facilitate that, make sure the analysis is being done in a relatively appropriate way. I mean, it's not in depth, but the data's there. We need to dig into it, and everyone's aware of it, so that they can say, "Oh, that thing. Let's go look into it again." So they have that shared knowledge, which means that it's less kind of archived in an inaccessible way.
Yeah, the hardware team often does kind of like day-long workshops where we just have rooms with wall-to-wall kind of post-its all separated out, and then we kind of have time to explore, like, okay, what do we see with this? What are we seeing with that? What are the take-homes at the end of the day? And it's a really fun kind of thing. It's also, work done. Okay.
Anybody else? Got one back there.
To add to this conversation, I listened in on a presentation a while back from a woman from Google who was doing a diary study, and they had thousands of participants over for a longitudinal study. And the way that they made it light on the data analysis side was actually to take a quantitative perspective and randomly sample the data so that they weren't actually consuming and analyzing every single word, but just using some of those techniques to help make it a little bit lighter.
Great. And question?
So we're reaching an agency setting. You mentioned you working on the client. How do you go about working with clients?
Yeah, so we tend to do like little highlight reels from the week or whatever the time period is of the last assignment. The shopping project actually is a pretty good example because every weekend, like every Monday, people checked in about what they did over the weekend. Did they do Black Friday? Did they? And so we had a lot of data coming in every week, and I set the expectation about when they're going to hear about that. So it comes in on Monday. If you want to engage and observe and log on and see what we're doing, you can, and then you kind of watch and see how a few of them do that. And then you say that there's a readout on Wednesday because we have to design next weekend's questions and push them out by Friday. So that whole loop is integrated. They know that in their schedule, and we actually talk about this a lot. Like colleagues of mine or other people who do these types of studies. How do you make that report out engaging? Are there video clips? Are there images? As much as you can say, here are these people that are talking about this real thing, and get them close to that, even if they're not in the depth of the data, to put a face on it that's not yours. You know, it's not all about your letterhead, and it's really, it's like, watch these 4 videos, because this basically encapsulates where we are right now. Or, you know, here's this one quote about where we're headed. And if you do a survey in conjunction with this is the one time, like, I feel okay using numbers in qual, because you can say 75% intend to shop next weekend. So next weekend is really important, guys, because it's 75% of 30 people, but still, it's a big part of this group. So it's really important for you to show up at the meeting on Wednesday and talk about what that question set is going to look like, because that's when something's happening. So if you kind of keep it to their lens, like what you're learning when, and when they need to give you input to make the study better, yeah, I mean, is that fair enough? Okay. Client teams with people that you need to keep engaged.
I think it's also part to the point that you mentioned earlier as well, having agency experience, but not just like this kind of study. It's why is this relevant? Remember, you hired us on to do this. And this is the information you needed to make your choices. This is what's going to be relevant to you. And they're already bought in a very literal sense. I mean, they've hired an external consultant. And so refreshing, like, this is what you're doing, this is why we're here, certainly adds to the reminder of that.
Any other questions? That.
How do you deal with the situation that someone quit in the middle of the process? Do you try to replace with someone who fit the same persona profile, or try to keep it same time? Yeah.
So how do you deal with participants who might drop out midway?
It depends.
It varies.
I think it's a little easier from a hardware standpoint for us. You know, it's kind of like, oh, okay, so just you know, because yeah, it is relatively simple to kind of replace with another persona, but I think it becomes more difficult when you do have something like Twyla, the study that you ran.
In our case, fortunately, we had one person drop out, which was one of the best success rate. The problem is that it's because we want to know usage over time, and because midterms were a detriment, we can't just slot somebody back in and be like, oh, we needed to know that comparison and evaluation, so we just could not, these were irreplaceable people. We couldn't do it. So there's that aspect of it. If there's times where there's change points where you can switch, like we've discussed, you've got this phase, you've got a secondary phase, and if that background information can be kind of gathered in a lightweight way. I've done this in a different one where we had kind of baseline usage and then new product usage. And if we can just kind of get self-report as best we can and then kind of map it on that way to replace the person, and then the second phase incorporate them that way. But again, what are your goals? What are you trying to learn? What is important in order to make the next kind of phase of development of your product? Do you need that background? Do you need that historical data of this individual? Or is it necessary you're still getting them on? How do you have other people who can compensate for that loss? If all people of this one persona left, well, that's a very different question. And then it's like, maybe this is something about this persona and we need to go pursue that and not these other things. So kind of looking at those variables.
You can spin it as a finding. That's even better. But no, I mean, I tend to think of it in two ways. Like if it is a short-term longitudinal project, I over-recruit. Over-recruit so that you net out. You know that there's going to be a certain amount of follow, like any study, and so you just sort of map it out. If it is indeed over time and you have refreshment points, I actually don't. I'm not. Well, it's different because I'm in a slightly different space, but I don't directly necessarily replace the exact type of person that I've lost, because we may have learned something that month, and we may have learned that this is appealing to a slightly older age bracket than we thought it was. So if we have a chance to refresh, we're going to refresh with people that we want to learn more from at that point, and it's actually seen as a little bit of an asset, right? If you start 50 men, women, and you realize, wow, women are just so much more excited about this, we're learning more from them, let's refresh with more women. So I think it's one of those two approaches.
Anybody else? All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. This is going to be the last user research Birds of a Feather for 2016, but we hope to see everybody again in 2017. To thank our panelists, and they're going to hang around a little bit, so if you want to ask questions individually, please come on up.